I am now joined by Natalie Wynn, better known by the name of her YouTube channel, ContraPoints. Thank you so much for coming, Natalie.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Hi, Ben.
Yeah, so I think that even though this is not the main thing I want to talk to you about, since the first time that you were ever on my radar was when I watched your video about Jordan Peterson, and he is coming out with with 12 more rules
Oh
for
boy,
life. Yes.
didn't have enough of them.
Yeah, no, now they're going to be 24, and it's going to be
24,
interesting to
yeah.
see like if this just keeps going, or there's a point where where he's done all the rules and there aren't any left.
He can't continue to come out with a new dozen every few years, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So oftentimes, like I think that a lot of a lot of videos that I remember after I watched that, I went back and watched some of the ones that you did where you're doing things like, hardly anybody does this, like actually arguing with like literal white supremacists and explaining why it does not actually make sense to say that the white race is going to be, wiped out in some way.
Yeah.
Um, so this seems like a lot, even though, maybe that specific thing, you're sort of done and you haven't done a lot of that lately, like it does seem like a lot of what you do is argue with things of various kinds that most people who agree with you about would just roll their eyes at. And I was wondering if you wanted to just speak a little bit to what you see as like, the value of that, or why that's something that interests you.
Well, I guess the way I see it, knowledge and maybe even reality itself is being divided into these bubbles. And you can produce discourse for your own bubble, and that's what I think most people online do. Is they, so if you're a leftist YouTuber, most leftist YouTubers these days, I feel like they kind of make leftist content for a leftist audience, and it becomes this well, I don't know, it's like the secular version of going to church or something, right? You're going to hear a well-spoken person deliver things that you already agree with. Maybe you'll learn some new things, but like fundamentally, you're not trying to, there's not an attempt to like open up your worldview to an outsider and to say like, look from my way of seeing. I guess, why do I do this? Well, I started on YouTube when there wasn't a whole lot in the way of like a leftist community there. There was this kind of feminist vlogger community, and there was like the Young Turks, but apart from that,
Right.
there wasn't like a really strong community, like a YouTube community. There wasn't a market, I guess you could say, for this type of content. So this was not something I went into because I was had some kind of like calculation about like, oh, here's an audience that I can make content for. Like, it was more about confronting a problem that I saw on the platform itself, which was that it was entirely overrun with like a sort of far right, well, I should say sort of center right movement that was
Mm.
moving to the far right at a terrifying pace. So I guess this was the era of dunking on SJW feminists, snowflakes, 76 genders, all that.
Right.
And I guess I thought what was happening is that people's like understandable frustrations with people who were called social justice warriors were becoming the center of their politics. I'm annoyed at activists. That's my political worldview, is like what these people seem to be saying. And I thought like, oh, that's really bad because, okay, activists are annoying, sure,
Right.
but a lot of the things activists are saying are true. A lot of the causes that the activists are representing are important. And if your politics becomes anti-activism, and that's basically what it is, anti-SJW, as it was called at the time, then like, not only does that put you in a kind of, I mean, you're now a conservative basically, because that's what conservatism is opposition to it's like to progressivism, it's opposition to change, it's for preservation of the status quo, usually by attacking anyone who's trying to change things. And then at worst, it also provided this kind of cover, this big right wing tent under which some very sinister people were found protection and community, up into and including like literally Nazis, Richard Spencer, and they found that this was actually a great sort of recruiting method for them, is that, oh, complain about the SJWs. Well, everyone likes complaining about the SJWs. So if we open up our Nazi ideas with a prologue about these crazy SJWs, like uh, it was a bad situation. So I decided to like try to go in and like talk to some of the people who were sort of in the process of getting radicalized by this kind of content.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. And it seems to work. I mean, I remember a while ago, I don't know, a year ago, something like that, maybe. All time blurs together, especially during the pandemic, so I'm not sure. But that there was a point where I remember when you were, I think, must have been one of the times you were using Twitter a little bit more, when you had you tweeted something to for people to tell you if they'd you'd convince them of something, and there were a lot of replies by people who were ex right wingers, ex IDW types, ex turfs, ex Nazis in some cases,
Yeah.
which seems to suggest that this does sometimes work. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that people tell themselves about how there's really no point to persuasion because everybody just kind of thinks what they think, and and you're not going to get to them. And I wonder if a lot of that is because of some of that, like media bubbling that you're talking about, and especially because when you do interact with representatives of other bubbles, it's likely to be the people who are the most hardcore and adamant about it because they're the only ones who would actually bother to talk to you.
Yeah, I think that's true. I guess I have a kind of more mixed history with directly interacting with like, uh, because it's one thing to kind of make content that's kind of geared to, that's with sort of a center right audience in mind. It's another thing
Yeah.
to be like, oh, I'm going to have a debate with Ben Shapiro. You know what I mean? I don't really do that so much. I also think that's less helpful in my case. I don't know. Maybe some people are fabulous at it. Like the streamer Destiny, I know,
Yeah.
has had a lot of success by having these kinds of debates. That's maybe not my strong point, but I do try to make I try to make these video essays where I make an argument that's sensitive to the fact that, uh, you know, if you want to convince people, then it's not enough to just be like, here's 10 things you need to stop saying about pansexuality or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I think people, it's not fun to be preached at. And if you want a big audience, there has to be a spoonful of sugar to make the medicine go down.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think even with debates, and I mean, I guess part of the problem is that there's a lot of confusion about the relationship between making arguments, which is something you do all the time. That you have that your videos, you tend to go out of your way to try to say, okay, this is what people who think this say. The incels, the turfs, the Nazis sometimes, or for that matter, left positions that you're arguing against. And here's what's wrong with it. But there's a difference between making arguments and having this like particular kind of like public spectacle, that's a debate. And I mean, I do think that like spectacle has some value, but like you also have to remember that it's like only half about the actual arguments that are being presented. Like at least half of it is like rhetorical pro wrestling,
Yes.
something something like that.
And
And oh, I'm sorry, you were saying.
no, I was good. But I agree that in debate, it's not just a spectacle; it's a particular kind of like, well, pro wrestling is a good analogy because it's a kind of machismo. I think that's involved a lot of the time, and that carries over into a lot of non-debate content on YouTube. Like the entire metaphor for argument is like owning destruction. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like a fairly like adolescent, like boyish kind of ethos that seems to be imported from gaming culture, and the idea, like the metaphor for an argument is owning someone, destroying them. Ben Shapiro wrecks so and so with facts and logic, right?
Yeah.
And like that's another thing that I kind of dislike because I feel no one's like no one's convinced by being wrecked, by being owned,
Right.
right?
Right,
like,
right, right, right,
like
right.
because this is a kind of, I don't know. To me, it's a very like a masculine game of trying to humiliate the enemy. Which, okay, sometimes there's a place for that. I'm not going to say there
Sure.
never is, but I find that I personally do not tend to be more receptive to someone's ideas if they're in the process of trying to destroy and humiliate me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I find that it's actually kind of counterproductive, that it serves maybe an entertainment goal of a sort. Again, only in the,
Mm.
I'm speaking to my in-group kind of way. Uh, People who are really fabulous at it, I guess, maybe can make it good. To like, there's a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, H Bomber guy on YouTube, who I guess he's his most famous meme moment is a response he did to Ben Shapiro about climate change, where he plays a clip of Ben Shapiro saying that, won't, oh, if the sea levels rise, won't people in coastal homes simply sell their houses? And then H Bomber guy takes an axe to his own wall, sticks his head through the hole, and shouts, "Sell them to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!" And it's like that became like a meme, and this is definitely like mockery, right? But it works,
Right.
right? It's funny. I think most people can look at that and see how ridiculous Ben Shapiro is being. So I don't want to completely discount like this type of
Yeah.
media, because I think it succeeds sometimes, but it's also and I'm not always above it myself,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I poured milk on an effigy of Jordan Peterson, but like I think that as far as your relationship to your audience, you know, you have to. I try to make them feel good about agreeing with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I also tend to think that like whether you're actually talking about debates or just like presenting arguments in videos, I, I mean, I think the germ of truth when people say nobody's ever convinced is that hardly anybody's ever convinced like in the room, right? Like just
Yeah.
in the middle of like talking about it, or even in the middle of like watching two people talk about it where they're really rooting for one person. It'd be super rare for anybody to just have a flash of light and be like, oh my God, I guess you're right. Right. Never mind. I think certainly looking back at, the times in my life when I've been convinced by things, it's never like that. Right. Like usually like my first reaction to hearing like a good argument for a position I disagree with is like irritation, and
Yes.
then, and
Yes.
then, and then maybe, right, if things go really well, then at best, right, maybe like I'm thinking back to it weeks later, when there's like less ego at stake, it's like, oh yeah, wow, that person had a point, didn't they?
Yeah. It's sort of the nature of how the human brain works, right? Like, no, that's that. You don't hear an argument against your position and just be like, oh, I'm completely wrong. You're right, right, and totally like because it's kind of an emotional component to
Right.
belief and to disagreement and to persuasion, isn't there? And also kind of sometimes even an identity component. Like, I guess like the most drastic example would be, say, like religious faith. Like, in order for someone to convert or to deconvert to a particular sect,
Yeah.
like that's often a question, that's often a matter that involves not just like beliefs and the way that you can kind of like rationalize in or out of in a sort of Thomas Aquinas way, or a rational atheist way, right?
Right.
It's you almost have to change how you think of yourself as a person in order to change your religious perspective, you know? And I think that political views can sometimes have that uh, kind of a depth to them as well. It's not necessarily not all the time. Like, I think that you can change your mind on like some of the small issues without necessarily like having to completely like reorient your place in the world. But I do think that
Yeah.
if someone's going to go from being a conservative to a leftist, that is
Right.
a major shift that often is going to be a like it's not just a, oh, I see now that if not A and not, or we know whatever,
Yeah.
like whatever, like some logical proposition you've been convinced of, or like it changes like it changes your relationship with your parents,
Right.
like
Right. Right. Right.
like
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
it's a big deal, and so people aren't going to do it lightly. People aren't going to do it over nothing, and yeah, I agree that in the times that I've changed my mind, often often if there's a conversation that kind of persuaded me, often in the
Yeah.
course of that conversation, I was fiercely opposed to what
Right,
the
right.
person who convinced me said up until the end of that conversation. And then I left. And then you're right. Yeah, it's like weeks later,
Yeah, yeah, that
creeps in on you.
maybe it like plants a little seed, or like
Yeah,
maybe
plants a
some
seed.
people
Yeah.
are, watching it at just the right time, when they're like in a place where they can do that. I mean, I think with the religious thing, actually, just out of curiosity, uh did you grow up in a religious family at all, or?
I grew up going to a Presbyterian church every week. And I was never that serious about it, but I uh, became disillusioned and quit when I was 15 years old.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of people, like with the religion thing, I find, right. I mean, like that um, I'm sure you were in philosophy grad school for a while, and so
Mm.
when I was, I'd have a lot of conversations with people about this because it's like something that comes up because I guess it's that they overlap between like esoteric arguing about philosophy and things that people actually care about,
Yeah.
and I think that a certain kind of person is persuaded by arguments and they become an atheist or something, but even there I wonder if in order to be in a place where that can happen, like there's a more basic shift, which is that like you're even thinking of this as the kind of thing that you could decide by thinking about arguments.
Yeah, exactly. I agree that that has to kind of be there first, or else, you're not going to change your mind. And I think like this is kind of what I think about increasingly. What I think about Trump's own supporters
Right.
is that, especially when you look at the QAnon, like
Yeah.
you're not going to convince someone to stop following QAnon with facts and logic, like
Well,
because
I mean, they're literally willing to say that the
yeah,
people who they said would be arrested have been arrested and they've been replaced by holograms.
right. Like this
So
is
that's
not
pretty
based,
impervious.
like
Yeah.
this is not grounded in facts and logic to any extent. And I think that, you know, a lot of it seems to be just, I guess there's actually a fabulous video about QAnon that was made by a YouTuber, Dan Olson, called In Search of a Flat Earth, I think is the name of it. And basically he talks about, uh, he says that QAnon, their beliefs like sort of shift over the months. So there's actually like very little consistency if you look on like what QAnon believers think in 2019 versus in 2020. And the only constants that he identifies are these kind of outcomes. There's the Great Awakening, and then there's the storm, where the mass arrests will take place and undesirables will be purged, and a glorious dawn for America will rise. Uh, well, the thing is, like, if that's the kind of core of the system of belief, isn't it? It's not. Is it the case that pedophilic Satanists are drinking the adrenaline glands of children and at the highest levels of government, right? Like that. No, they because of course there's no evidence for that. So that is kind of an imaginative premise
Right.
inserted to reach the conclusion that of what they want, which is this kind of authoritarian takeover, basically, crackdown on all these protesters.